I've got 5 things that I believe you should stop doing in your Dynasty rookie drafts on today's video. Do me a massive favor. Drop a like to show some support. Subscribe if you like Dynasty content. I want you to comment down below what's something that you have learned over the last couple of years of playing Dynasty that you no longer do in Dynasty rookie drafts. Now, before we continue, I think it's really important to note that no one has a crystal ball with Dynasty rookie drafts. We can be the best evaluators. We can look at all the analytics, but at the end of the day, we just cannot predict every part of the NFL. That's just the reality. But big shout out to Pitt Falls over on our Discord. Join our Discord with a link in the description. We have a suggest content ideas tab for our videos. He said, would love a recap on your past 2 years of rookie drafts or even startups to see what you got wrong versus right and what common trends of mistakes were made. So I decided I'm going to look at some of my drafts from last year, and I'm also just going to bring a little bit of advice that I've learned over the years of playing Dynasty football. So number 1, and I think this is the most important thing that I could possibly say, draft the best player available in your rookie drafts, then trade for needs. Or don't draft for need is what I'm trying to tell you. So let's say you're a running back needy team, but you are at the 107 and the best players available are clearly wide receivers. Well, don't draft a running back, draft a wide receiver and then trade for need later. There's a lot of examples of this and people making the wrong decision over the years. But just from last year, I feel like James Cook was a really good example of this. If people need a running back, they might have reached on James Cook. I'm going to show you 3 of my rookie drafts from last year and some examples, right? We saw James Cook at the 107 in this league, ahead of guys like Kenny Pickett in a super flex format, Jameson Williams, Christian Watkins, Jahan Dotson, George Pickens. So in this scenario, clearly that player probably had a running back need, but there was a lot of players, at least for myself, that I had graded way above James Cook. You can see here again at the 108, James Cook was drafted ahead of Garrett Wilson and Jameson Williams and a couple really good wide receivers that were still on the board. So again, there's so many examples, but in this one alone, if you had drafted Garrett Wilson, could you imagine what his value would be in the market today instead of drafting James Cook? If you needed running back, you could have really addressed that in the trade market after your rookie drafts. Now, to be fair, James Cook is a tough one because he did get pretty good draft capital at the end of the 2nd round, but in my player evaluation, in my scouting, he was not someone that I had anywhere near a 1st round grade for Dynasty drafts. So again, I think a lot of people would have overdrafted James Cook because they needed a running back last year. Number 2, don't let a landing spot drastically change who you draft in your rookie drafts. We can all be victims of this, unfortunately, right? You start to envision how this player could be utilized with the personnel around him rather than focusing on the limitations of that prospect. Don't get me wrong, landing spots absolutely do matter, but I strongly believe that they shouldn't impact your decision as much as they have in the past for a lot of people out there, right? Best example you could possibly think for this point, we all know Clyde Edwards-Helaire in 2020, right? In February, shout out to DLF, which is where I'm getting this ADP from. In February of 2020, Clyde was the RB5, which to be honest, that might have even been a little bit high for Clyde, was never a good athlete. Then he gets drafted in April to the Chiefs, and then in May, he has ADP of RB1. He flies up boards, the 102 in Superflex, the 101 in one quarterback formats. Now, to be fair, draft capital was also incredible for Clyde, right? He went in the 1st round, one of the last picks to the Kansas City Chiefs, but there's just no scenario in which we could have evaluated these prospects and said, yes, Clyde is a better prospect. He's a better talent than Swift, than Jonathan Taylor, than name a player in that class. So he's probably the best example. There's no way he should have gone that early, and a lot of people had to learn that lesson. Just because he went to a good offense, he's with Patrick Mahomes, doesn't make him a more talented player, right? Another example I think of last year in 2022, there's 2 names I'll say. First is Sky Moore. again, the Kansas City Chiefs bump. You got to be careful of that kind of bump. I think we could see that this year with the Bills, Bengals, etc. But in February of 2022, Sky Moore was a wide receiver 13 according to ADP. And then in May, he jumped up to the wide receiver 6. Now, I liked Sky Moore. He was one of my sleepers last year around February, but he just jumped way too high for me, and I thought he was being overdrafted. You can see in some of my drafts last year, we saw Sky Moore. I mean, in one of them, he went as high as the 104. I actually traded out of the 104 so someone could draft Sky Moore, but he went ahead of Drake London, ahead of Treylon Burks, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jameson Williams, Jahan Dotson, like all these players who had first round draft capital and were clearly better prospects. Again, trust the talent, bet on the talent, not just a situation. I can also think of James Cook in the 2022 draft class, right? This has a little bit to do with the first point, people drafting for need, but also I think people fell in love with him to the Buffalo Bills and being in that offense. In February of 2022, he was RB9 in ADP. Then we jump to May after the draft, he's RB3. He jumps up drastically. And you can see, as we talked about before, James Cook in some of my rookie drafts being drafted ahead of Jameson Williams, Christian Watson, Kenny Pickett, Garrett Wilson, Jameson Williams, Jahan Dotson, right? So another example of people kind of falling in love with a landing spot and not really the talent. Look, you're never going to get everything right, okay? No one has a crystal ball and no one has 100% success or hit rate. But what is some information maybe that you should use to make those difficult decisions in drafts instead of landing spot? Well, in order, I would say number one, your scouting talent evaluation, right? Film analytics. Number two, I would say draft capital, because we have historical data to prove that it's very important, not bulletproof, but important. Number three, I would say combine testing results, right? Are they the athlete that you thought that they were? Is what you saw on film confirmed by testing? And then in last of that order, I will put landing spot, because certain players are set up to succeed. They have a clearer pathway than others, a la Dameon Pierce last year. Who was he really going to compete with, right? So landing spot, again, it is important, but it should not be one of those things that make you, I'm going to draft him over this player who is clearly a better talent because of the landing spot, right? On to number three, don't overdraft quarterbacks who don't get necessary draft capital. This is specifically for my super flex people over there. I'm biased. I think it's the best way to play. But first and second round draft capital is at minimum typically what you're looking for. Now, of course, there are some examples of later round quarterbacks who have been successful, right? Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, but those guys are the exception. They are not the rule. And 2022, I think, was a huge lesson for a lot of people on overdrafting quarterbacks. Again, it has a little bit to do with drafting for their need, right? But overdrafting quarterbacks who got really bad draft capital. Again, here, one of my rookie drafts, you can see we had Ritter, Willis, Howell all go before the 206 in Dynasty rookie drafts, right? Before Algier, Dameon Pierce, Rashad White, Alec Pierce, Trey McBride, some of these guys that we really liked, John Mechie. And then I'll look at a couple other drafts. We can see Malik Willis was drafted at the 2-6. Clearly Malik Willis, right? And Matt Corral at the 2-10. Clearly those guys are not going to return that value. They never had the draft capital really where we thought they were going to. Again, Malik Willis at the 2-4, Matt Corral at the 2-10, ahead of Algier, ahead of Rashad White. So I know there are examples of quarterbacks being successful in the third, in the fourth round, but it is, again, the exception, not the rule. You really only want to be drafting those quarterbacks who get that first, early second round draft capital. Number four, don't let a real life first round wide receiver fall to the second round of your dynasty rookie drafts. The scenario we're looking at here, if your scouting, your evaluation, the testing, and the draft capital, if those things all line up and are perfect, you should not be letting that wide receiver fall to the second round of dynasty rookie drafts. There's an exception, right? If you just aggressively have a low score on that wide receiver who went in the first round, a low scouting grade rather. For me, that's probably going to be Jalen Hyatt this year, right? I like the player, but I don't think he deserves first round draft capital, even though he's probably going to be drafted in the first round. But let me show you a good example. 2022 drafts. Again, I'll show you some of my drafts. Jahan Dotson. I loved the talent. He, graded out really well when I looked at analytics and film. Loved the draft capital. And the reason people didn't draft him was because of the landing spot. Isn't that crazy? We just talked about at the beginning of the video, people didn't draft him because of the landing spot. They neglected the talent and the draft capital because of the landing spot. I just think it's the worst process you could make. But again, Jahan Dotson at the 2-1. Look at another draft. We have Jahan Dotson again at the 2-1. And then in the third draft I was going to show you guys, he went at the 111. So at least in 2 of the 3 that I'm showing you today, he went in the first round. But do not let these first round wide receivers who are good route runners, expansive route trees, are able to gain separation really well, advanced route runners, don't let these guys fall into the second round. You're going to regret it. Let's project into this year. Some guys who could, keyword could, be drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. Kayshon Boutte, Zay Flowers, Josh Downs. All 3 of those players, I really enjoyed watching their film and scouting them. Great route runners, can gain separation. Jalen Hyatt, on the other hand, not someone that I really enjoyed watching his film. Didn't show much versus press coverage. Only 1 reception versus press coverage. So in general, if all 3 of those things line up, scouting, testing, and draft capital, don't let that wide receiver fall to the second round. And number 5, the late second, early third round in Superflex formats, right, is a great spot to take some tight ends. If we look at real drafts from last year, we saw a lot of Greg Dulcich in the 4th round. We had Danny Bellinger mid-third, late third. We had Trey McBride late second. I think Jelani Woods is still going to come good. In other drafts, we had Dulcich into the 3rd. Again, more Trey McBride. And in the last one, Dulcich ended up being a huge steal. But specifically for this class coming up, it's a very good tight end class. Michael Mayer, Dalton Kincaid, Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft. These are very, very good tight ends. Do not be afraid this year specifically to draft these guys late second round, early third round. I know the general rule is don't draft rookie tight ends. These are good tight ends, and some of them could be starters from day one, specifically Kincaid and Michael Mayer. Then you look back to 2021, right? Let's look back a year further. Pat Freiermuth was a end of the second round pick in Superflex drafts. He absolutely paid off that ADP. How about a year further? You had to wait a little bit, but Cole Kmet was the 310. Great draft pick. So I know there's this stigma to not draft tight ends, but sometimes you can hit, and I think late second, early third, and onwards is a really good time to take some shots on tight ends. That's when a lot of the running backs who had draft capital aren't available. Same with wide receivers, and the quarterbacks you could draft in those areas typically aren't going to be impact quarterbacks. So don't be afraid to take a shot on some of those tight ends. So those are 5 things that I've learned over my time playing Dynasty and doing rookie drafts. Of course, there's probably like 20, 30, 100 things that you could really point out, but those are 5 things I wanted to bring today. Do me a massive favor. Why don't you drop a comment, share some information to the community. What are some tips that you've learned over the years? Drop a like on the video to show some support. Subscribe if you like Dynasty content, and we will see you guys in the next video. All up.
Yo, what's good? Thanks for watching. We got a lot more videos.
A lot more.
If you want more videos,
watch it.
You can also subscribe
right now
if you want to.
You need to.
And lastly, don't forget that you can sign up to support the show and get exclusive content by going to patreon.com/fantasylandfam.